We'll start in about 2 minutes, folks. 2 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's 4 o'clock on Wednesday. For those joining online, we have a number of people here with us from the community. We're live on Facebook right now, and this will be recorded and saved for the future. So thank you all for taking the time to join. I appreciate everyone getting back together after a few months away from our reopening work. And for the purposes of this reopening task force, I want to start with sincere gratitude and appreciation. I feel as if our reopening plan was very widely received very well by our community, our students, our parents, and just wider Amherst Mount Vernon community have been very happy. Other places nearby us have had really difficult reopenings, and some aren't even in school yet, whether in person at all. And I just have to say, this group deserves the credit for that and for that plan that we put together. It's not been without bumps and without issues that we've had to work out, and more to come on those. But I just want to thank you all. The work we did over the summer was very helpful and meaningful to me, and made a big difference. And so I want to thank you for that. Also, our school nurses have gone above and beyond in helping us. We've been very successful at keeping our in-person side of things working well, and it's in large measure because of the work of the nurses. They have conversations every day with parents, students, and staff members about our protocols and the right decisions to make and the right process to follow. And because of that, we've had almost no cases in our schools to date. And it's not, it certainly has to do with just favorable circumstances in our community, but also it's the work of our nurses and the job they have done. They've also been meeting with me every other week, all school year, with a safety committee along with a few others. And we've been dealing with issues as they come up and making decisions and adjustments to our plans. And our nurses have just been pivotal. We've been tracking data in the background. As you know, we publish on our website our active cases, as well as those who have been quarantined according to DHHS. In addition to that, we're tracking symptomatic students and staff members on the back end, and confidentially, of course, and using that to make sure that we're following up when necessary. And that's worked very well. Our state hasn't always been consistent in providing us with resources or guidance. And so luckily our school nurses have, and we've made adjustments to things along the way, and they really deserve a lot of credit. And then finally, our teachers. Our teachers are having a very difficult year in their career. They have expressed how difficult this has been and how this reopening has gone for them. And while everyone in every job sector is adjusting to change, our teachers really are at the forefront of that. And it's not been easy, and they deserve lots of recognition for that. With that, I wanted to review data with this committee as a starting point. So we have all of one active cases in our school right now. It's a high school staff member who doesn't interact with students and lives out of state. And so we have basically no cases that are active in our schools. We have several people who are still quarantined from old cases that were active in recent memory. But in general, we've had just isolated cases at each of our schools. And so the survey, the case data is very, very low and remains so. With that said, we've been looking ahead. I've been looking ahead to what might happen over the holidays, because there's been a lot of talk about what will happen when, number one, college students return from college, and many colleges are having students remain home from Thanksgiving through Martin Luther King Day or later in January. And so what will happen when that occurs? Also, what will happen when people travel? And so our concern has been, what impact will that have on our staffing or our ability to keep the in-school portion of our schools open? So we did a survey of parents, students, and staff members. We had 1,650 results distributed throughout our various schools, as you would imagine. First of all, folks were asked their overall satisfaction with our school system's implementation of our reopening plan, and very, very positive results, as you can see. On a 1 through 6 scale, the highest incident answer was number 5, but 4, 5, and 6 show that a large majority of folks have overall satisfaction with our plan. There was a lot of individual feedback, thousands of answers that I won't go into today, but very helpful. But to the question, what are your holiday travel plans in November and December? 15% of folks said they're likely to travel outside of New England. That was not evenly distributed between students and staff. It was about 26% of staff said that they were planning to travel outside of New England, and about 13% of students. About 58% of folks said that they're not going to travel out of New England, but they're likely to get together with extended friends or family for the holidays. And about a quarter of folks said that they're not likely to do that. From there, we've asked our staff to provide non-anonymous answers, meaning we've asked them their specific travel plans, and we're still gathering that data, but it looks to be a little bit lower than what the anonymous survey said for people traveling out of New England, but still is likely an issue. Last Friday, I alerted the school community that given the rising case counts in our country and in our state, and in addition to rising case counts, what looks to be an increase in the positivity rate for testing, that there's a likelihood we'll need to move to an orange or red status in the near future. Frankly, a couple of weeks ago, my assessment was that we would definitely have to move to a more restrictive status, likely red, for the months of December and January, which is segments 5 and 6. But our case counts have returned to a de minimis level, and there's no reason to make that commitment as of this point. However, things can change quickly, and so our administration has been working on their orange and red plans to refine those. If you recall, our reopening plan was light on the details for both of those, and so we've asked folks to review those and provide some guidance or provide some refined plans for both of those status levels. And that brings us to this committee. So I really have 4 things I'd like from this reopening task force, if possible. And I shared those in an email with this group. Most of them, 2 I didn't, I'm adding today, but I'll share those for the benefit of those watching. So first, given our recent staff, student, and parent survey, should we consider a more restrictive status during segments 5 or 6? In other words, should we be preemptive in that decision-making process, or should we wait and let the process play out? Second, given the increased likelihood of needing to implement orange or red sometime in the future, we want this task force to provide some guidance on the protocols we put in place in each of those modalities. As we're developing plans in our schools, we're looking for ways to back what works for kids at a various age level with what we can do in our schools. So for example, at the elementary level, we're already doing a good job of isolating students and keeping them in small groups. And we also know that for elementary students, that remote instruction is least effective at that age group. On the flip side, at the high school level, we know that remote instruction may not be preferred by everybody, but it's not a reasonable facsimile for in-person instruction, but it's also not it's more effective than it is for students in the earlier grade levels. And also with the mixing of classes at the high school level, we might have the need for more restrictive restrictions if we're in an orange or red status. So we wanted to talk through that and get your feedback on those plans as we develop them. Third, as we look ahead, I have to start the process now of looking ahead to next school year. 2 questions associated with the future. What does this task force recommend we ought to think about for parents in terms of options for the summer of 2021 and into the fall of 2021 with that next school year? What I mean more specifically is a typical school process is you go through a year of being a first grader and then you become a second grader. You eventually leave one school to go and matriculate to the next school, and eventually you graduate with your fellow 18-year-olds from high school. Do we need to consider changing or making amendments to that process of typical matriculation in schools because of the educational and academic impacts of COVID-19 for this school year and last? So that's a third question. Fourth, I'm looking just for early prognostications for next school year as it relates to vaccines, therapeutics, and policy-related decisions associated with what it might mean for the next school year, knowing that it really is just looking into the future. So with that said, what I'm hoping to do is from today, start those conversations around those 4 topics. Second, ask our subcommittees to get together over the next 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks from today, pull this committee back together for recommendations from those and feedback from those subgroups to help inform those questions. So that's our proposed process. I thought this would take me longer to get through, but it's 4:12 and I'm ready for your initial feedback from folks. So with that, I'll open it up and just ask for initial feedback on the process. And then after hearing any of that, we'll move into the first question about segments 5 and 6. So any initial feedback from the group? Hearing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Amy Facey, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, so what's your, I can't remember all of the items that you want us to consider, but what is your timing on that? And are you going to have each subgroup meet and discuss each of those and then report back? Is that what your thoughts are on the process?
Yes. So I just shared the link to today's back to the Trello board, which I reactivated, and I have all of this information I have there for everybody. So that's first. But then yes, I would have each subcommittee ask them to evaluate those 4 questions and provide recommendations back about each of those things. Any others? All right. So given topic number 1, which I'll copy and paste this into the chat for everybody to be able to see. Given the data we have from our staff and students, do we preemptively make a change to our status level for segment 5 and or 6, or do we wait and have things play out? So I'd love to hear people's initial reactions and thoughts to that question.
I can start, Adam. I think that's a great idea. I'm a remote teacher anyway, so I am for the extra caution, but I also think it mirrors what's happening at UNH. where a lot of kids go there. I think they are done on November 23rd with the idea that they'll come back after, after the January break. So I think, it would be in line with what's happening at the university level.
Thanks, Jolene.
I'll just mention what some of the universities are doing. I think most of them are sending the kids home before Thanksgiving, and that's the end of the semester on campus. My daughter's school is also saying, take all your stuff. You may come back in January, but take all your stuff anyways. So I think they're kind of preparing not to go back in January, is what it looks like.
Thank you, Peter. Others?
Adam, I had a question as well. It seemed like when we met last, we had worked out pretty much everything, but the sports was a question at the end of when I thought we got together, whether sports was going to occur in the fall or not. And that was sort of outside. And I look at that. I mean, as much as I love sports, I look at that as a real risk when we have kids going all over the state. And how does that fit into the levels? If we go up a level, does that automatically kick into the sports programs and extracurricular and things like that?
I think that's something I'd be looking for feedback from the various subcommittees if they have guidance about things like sports. We have done it so far. It has appeared to not create additional case counts thus far, but that's a great question about in a higher status level, do we restrict things like athletics? Thank you. Deanna, your hand's up.
I just wanted to say that, the nurses every week have been listening to school nurse call from the state public health department with Dr. Chan, Dr. Talbot, and Dr. Daly. And their concern right now is coming up into this holiday season is that so many people will be meeting up with other people and kind of getting out of their little box right now. And so they're foreseeing that there is going to be quite a bit of spread of COVID. So it's a huge concern. And I think we really need to think about that, like you said, and that's why we're all together, going maybe towards what the colleges and some other schools might be doing as well to try to contain this.
Thanks, Deanna. Dr. Edinger.
Hey, sorry, just had to turn on there. So thanks for the summary. That was really helpful. I have a couple questions. So how much, I imagine this is going to vary by the school, but how much disruption do you see in the students' learning by the switch to full remote? Obviously, the kids who are doing remote will continue with that, but are teachers going to be the same? Can you give me a sense of, are the teachers going to stick with the kids who are in school or doing a hybrid model currently, or is it going to just be kind of a wild card, is the Wild West as far as who's going where and how they're being taught?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've not finalized our plans yet. We hope to provide previews of those to this committee in 2 weeks, actually. Our administrators have done rough drafts and they're actually sharing them with their faculties first for feedback, which has only happened at one of our 4 schools so far. So I can't tell you exactly, but I would say it's likely that there will be some reshuffling that has to happen if we went fully remote, because the distribution of students between in-person and remote isn't consistent now, grade to grade or school to school. And so there are some places where a remote classroom might only have 8 or 9 kids in it, but the in-person has edged up higher as we've been open. So there's some of that would result in a reshuffle.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Amy.
So can you maybe talk a little bit about what you mean by more restrictive? Would this be fully remote, or would it be something in between what we have now and fully remote?
Yeah, thank you. So originally we said that status orange would be, we would try to limit the in-school capacity to 25 or 30% of students. And so that would be the idea that we, whereas right now we have, we are 6 feet of social distancing in almost every case, but students might be outside at Sauhegan eating and being nearby each other, and that's considered okay. In a more restrictive status, that would not be okay. There would be, we would be much more, I guess the right word is intentional about ensuring those kind of things happen inside, outside, all the time, and then significantly restricting the number of students in the building. So it would mean there would no longer be full 5-day school for any students. It would be some shared model of kids coming for half days or partial days or limited days in the week. That's what Orange would be. In addition to having still a fully remote option for those students who don't want to come at all still, we would still have the fully remote option for them. And then red would be the school is closed. Similar to last spring, schools are closed, not available, not open for staff or students. In the rarest of cases, when the provision of special education services cannot happen remotely, there might be a building that is open for that purpose, where very few students are accessing the physical school, but in general, our schools are shut down and status red. And then Dr. Edinger again. John, did you have your hand up again?
I'm sorry. Realistically, how much time do you need to move from one status level into the next? I'm just thinking if we decide to wait and delay, and then we need to move fast, how practical is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the directive that we gave to our building principals was we need to refine our orange plans in case they're needed as soon as Monday, October 26th, next Monday. We don't think that's the case. We're not preparing for that. We don't think we need that, but we needed to be ready in case we do. The reality is, as I see it, is we probably will not have the time to give the whole community, a 2-week lead time, because what will likely to happen is case counts or the positivity rate will dramatically increase over a few days and result in us needing to be pretty swift in our reaction to that. And so depending on how that happens and when it happens, it's likely there would have to be a transition time of a couple of days where school is just shut down before we, implement and go to orange. If we're doing it preemptively for segments 5 or 6 because of holiday travel or what have you, that's different. We would transition from a Friday to a Monday or whatever, because everyone would have plenty of notice.
Okay, thank you.
Amy Facey.
Sorry, full of questions today. So what are the requirements if a student or teacher travels outside of a particular area? Do we have that set up?
Yeah, so the state of New Hampshire guidelines apply to us, which are if someone travels outside of New England, upon return, they have to quarantine for 14 days. And so we of course would enforce that, require that of our staff and students.
So does that change our thinking at all? Perhaps if folks who are traveling are not going to be in the school?
Indeed. So that's why we've asked our staff to tell us now what their travel plans are for the holidays, so that if we find out that in after Christmas that 25% of our staff are unavailable to come into the physical building, that might make the decision easy for us for at least the 2 weeks after the winter break. Or what's also likely is if it's all of one group of a staff, for example, if all 6 of our nurses were traveling out of New England for Christmas, that would impact our ability to open school if we don't have any nurses in our, that's just a random example, but all of first grade, if all of first grade at one of our schools did the same thing, that might impact our ability to do something. So we're asking that specifically so we can have that data to review if in case we need to make the plan ahead of time. Go ahead, Peter.
Adam, are the parents aware of the quarantine requirements? I know, like my employees, I make very aware if you're out of state, you can't come into the office for 2 weeks, but are parents aware of that? before they make their holiday travel plans.
Yeah, I'm sure there are some who aren't aware, but to the extent that we've been able to tell people, we've been telling people and
Okay.
reminding them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. LaBranch. Yep, I'm going to unmute
I
you,
don't
Dr.
have
LaBranch.
the full plan in front of me, but five begins on October 27th.
That's number 4. 5 is the segment between Thanksgiving and the holiday break, and 6 is January, basically.
Okay, so really the concern is segment 5 at this point in time, and I think we have to creep before we run on this, and based upon the positivity rate that you have now with respect to the school district, and understanding we're watching carefully what's happening with regard to the state. And we know from the Health and Human Services Office in Concord that much of that increased positivity is happening as a consequence of a couple of things. One, again, the nursing homes, and 2, people starting to, if you will, get out of their bubble and begin to have more gatherings with extended, whether it's extended family who live outside the household or with friends. And I think that trend, as we've been discussing, is going to continue, obviously, right through Thanksgiving. And I think in piggybacking on several other comments with respect to college and universities, I happen to be aware of a couple of them. One, my son is an administrator, and the other, I have a granddaughter there. And precisely what the others have said with respect to, after Thanksgiving, basically it's remote. Once you go home, it's going to be remote until we give you the signal that you can come back in January. So I think the process that you set up and the plans that this committee has established well along this trajectory lends it quite nicely to being able to have your administrative team come up with some pretty solid recommendations within the subcommittee to handle things right through this Thanksgiving break, which buys you some time as you look ahead to what's going to be happening beyond that. We do know in athletics, to go back to a comment about that the NHIA has just approved this past weekend that all winter sports can begin practicing on December 13th. Now, I have not heard what they're planning to do with schedules. Schedules, for example, at the college and university level, where they are still planning to have winter sports, are playing on weekends. They're not playing during the week. They're playing only on weekends to, if you will, contain the amount of contact that is going to occur and the amount of travel time. So, and again, I don't know if the NHL has considered that in its scheduling process, but if we go forward with an athletic program, I do think that the administration at Sauhegan is going to have to take a hard look at that scheduling, particularly December, January.
Thank you, Dr. LaBranch. So you would advocate for not making a preemptive decision now and wait until we get closer to.
Yeah, unless the administrative team comes up with something, it seems that we're in a pretty decent place right now through Thanksgiving. Unless we see some spikes in positivity rates, and I don't see that. And in case rates, you're not reporting that. It would appear that people are abiding by the protocols that have been laid out with respect to how we're going to operate in our schools and how we're going to operate with regard to our social contact and social distancing. Again, my fear is, as expressed by several this afternoon, as more people come home and there are more reasons, if you will, to gather, then I think we begin to look at the whole, again, the concept of some community spread.
All right, I appreciate that very much. Deanna, would you be willing to speak about I think our parents deserve a lot of credit. They're not sending sick kids to school except in very rare circumstances. We've had very few times we've had to um, really address parents individually and say that this kiddo shouldn't be at school. But I know you've sent a number of kids out to be tested based on them being symptomatic or them contacting us and letting us know that they have that issue. But how many times has that happened, Deanna? Do you have any idea?
I just looked it up. We'll keep a running total. We have so far between the high school, the middle school, Clark Wilkins and Mount Vernon Village School, we've had 340 people that we have sent home, or have all of those have had to have testing before returning to school. So it's been really busy in the nurses' offices. With any symptoms, we are sending people home. So just so you know.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sounds like a lot. That'd be more than I would anticipate. Hey, Adam, can I just say something really quick? Just because I have to jump off early, but I just some things that we discussed when we were on the scientific subcommittee. So Deanna was part of that. Jonathan was part of that. Dr. Edinger. The big thing to remember is that the spread of the virus within the school community will reflect the spread of the virus in the larger community. So in other words, you're not on an island, and so even though we're not seeing any positive cases within the school now, we are starting to see cases increase in Merrimack County and Hillsborough County. Some of the surveillance data is showing that those are starting to go up, and that's reflective of what's happening more broadly across the country. Typically is what you would see from an infectious disease standpoint when temperatures get colder and people move inside. So I think that we need to, if it were me, if I were a parent, I would like to know that we're strongly considering going to orange in segment 5 and 6, at least orange in segment 5 and 6, so people can plan. The larger surveillance data that I saw this week on Monday from the folks that I work with, who work with the folks at Operation Warp Speed, November 16th could be a big day for us. Like that could be that could be when you just start to see things just go straight up. So I think we talked about that a little bit, Adam, just trading texts, and I thought that was an interesting curve that I saw. So all of my attention is on that day. So the reason I say that is because I think we should plan as if that was a very high likelihood. And that we should at least start communicating that we're going to take action toward that end. And we could always unwind it when people come back from Thanksgiving if it doesn't appear to be as severe. But I think we need to communicate to the broader community that there could be a change, at least to orange for segment 5 and potentially segment 6. The other thing is, I think we should be careful in comparing ourselves to colleges and universities. It's a completely different animal. We have to look at ourselves more as local businesses or those types of things. Colleges and universities have very different, more complex problems that they're going to navigate. But as far as sports is concerned, in the hockey community, you're seeing a significant amount of spread within hockey. Not surprised because they play indoors. So I think that we should also think about the fact that we're going to be severely limited in terms of what we can do with indoor sports. November, December, January, we'll likely see the ability to do spring sports because we're going to be back outside. Hockey is an indoor sport, basketball is an indoor sport. So we need to set people's expectations on that, if you would ask me. And the last thing that I want to hit on is who the heck is talking to the NHIAA? Because some of the decisions they're making, I saw the football playoff proposal. Not smart, if you ask me, because they're planning on having every team come in and then they're not going to be done until November 23rd. I think that somebody needs to get to the NHIAA and say, you guys need to set up a structure so you guys are done and have your championship played as fast as possible. To stretch this thing out to Thanksgiving is not to be entirely in touch with reality. And I think somebody from our school system needs to go to them and say that, because and then, like the practicing, starting practicing in December for basketball and stuff, I think it's way too soon. I mean, why even communicate that at this point? So anyway, that's my soapbox.
Shaded Jim. Deanna.
Sorry, I just wanted to add too, we're coming up into flu season too, which is concerning with this for attendance as well. But we have already had one student that has confirmed flu, and that's really early for the flu. So I'm hoping it's not going to be a rough season, but just so you know that, I don't know if it's picked up because they went for COVID testing as well, and they tested them for both, but that's something we need to keep an eye on as well.
All right, I appreciate that. So I'm going to move us along if I could. So as the subcommittees get together, I'm really asking you folks to dial in on that advice to me about, do we preemptively make that change for segment 5 and 6? Jim, to your point, last Friday, my community message, I did warn the community and say very clearly that there's a high likelihood we'll have to make that change, not committing to it yet. But so I've started the process of preparing the community. But I'm really hoping that these subcommittees can provide a recommendation in 2 weeks about their thought process about, do we wait or do we just make the call? Do we make the call now? So moving on to the second, which there isn't a whole lot to share yet because we haven't shared our reopening plan, but the second question is about what orange and red should look like. So red, frankly, I think is easy. We're going to close school. That's the easiest one. We've already done that for 3 months this past spring. It'll be different than this past spring. I want to make that clear. We've learned a lot of things and made changes. The spring was really about survival. We know that that we need to have the school year count to the extent it's possible. And so remote instruction is very different now than it was in the spring. But orange in particular is one we're hoping the subcommittee can dial in for us. And so not a lot of feedback we need today, but I am going to ask our admin team in 2 weeks to be ready to share their draft proposals with this group so this group can provide feedback. I can tell you, because I've already reviewed them, it does differentiate between an elementary plan, a middle school plan, and a high school plan because of the age of the students, what their needs typically are. But I can tell you right away, there's going to be a concern for families about schedules that don't always align. And this group may need to weigh in on, do we sacrifice the educational interest of our students to make it easier on families? And that's an important question that we'll have to wrestle with, because what's best for kids is not going to be what's best for families when it comes to the status orange. I can tell you that already. In other words, elementary kids, we need them in person more often. High school kids, we need them in touch less often. Well, right there, we've created a discongruous schedule between for families that have kids in multiple schools, which most of our families do. So that's that question.
Adam?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. LaBranche.
Your last comment with respect to most of our families do, would it be helpful to have that data?
Yeah, thank you for that. We actually do have it. I believe it's 60% of our families have students in more than one school. So that's a pretty healthy margin. Thank you, Shilu, for that comment. No problem. I know some people have to run. Next, for today's purposes, any thoughts about, as we start, I know I can't believe we're like looking this far into the future, but as we think about next summer or the next school year, what things that we take for granted in schools should we start to look at and investigate? Because what I'm suspecting will happen is that we'll get to the end of this school year and we'll see that when we test our students, we're going to identify gaps. There's going to be students that have not made the type of progress that they normally would have, and there's going to be concerns about that, and kids get one chance at school. I don't think our answer can be we just graduate them or move them along and just say, oh, well. And so initial feedback from this group about the sort of things we should be thinking about as we look forward to the summer of 2021 and how we place students for next school year. Any initial thoughts from this group about those big questions? Dr. LaBranche.
I would suspect that the admin team would have some recommendations with respect to their baseline data. Now, given that we're in some very unusual circumstances and for the, for what will turn out to be, it looks like a year and a half, you're not going to be in the business of retaining everybody that needs to be retained. But what is the plan with respect to what is the baseline data that we're going to expect at any level of the continuum that students are going to have to be able to demonstrate some level of proficiency. And then I would think a plan emanates out of that with regard to whether it's a summer school hybrid initiative or a straight summer school that helps fill in some of the gaps where there are some major gaps with these students so that they can track as close as possible with the youngsters that they started out with. I know it's going to be complicated. I know the complexity of it is going to be terribly challenging in setting that up. But I do think that you prodding us to think about it today is very helpful as we look forward to this next school year.
Thank you, Dr. LaBranche. Amy.
One more comment. There's no statewide testing, right?
There is.
That's been put on hold, so we don't have that baseline, do we?
Well, Dr. Bernasconi, what's the plan with statewide testing?
So we have the interim New Hampshire SAS test coming up later this fall that we are required to administer. And I believe that we'll have spring testing as well.
But we rely on NWEA data, which we've done that testing this fall already, and we'll do again in the spring. But Dr. LaBranche, continue.
The spring will be when you really need to roll that out to see where your students are.
And our high school kids our juniors just took the PSAT, and they'll take the SAT as well, and all of that. Amy Facey.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we should definitely be looking at NEWA scores in terms of growth. But I was going to say, as a board member, thank you for bringing this up, because I think we should be considering potential budget impact if we're going to be having to do competency recovery or other type of summer school opportunities for students. So, and that process is happening now. So we should be looking at that.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Edinger.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a great discussion. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. Do all grade levels have some form of objective testing aside from the grades themselves? Like a NEWA equivalent? What happens to a freshman or sophomore in high school? Can you just remind me?
Yeah, so all of our students through grade, what is it at the high school, Mike, 10, take the NWEA test. But that's not reviewing that they've met all the competencies of that particular grade level. That's a review to see where they stand relative to their peers, and it gives us some insight into how they might perform on a state test or the SAT down the road. And so there's on a class by class basis, there's not necessarily a test we can rely on, but NWEA is very good because it gives us not only how the student has achieved, but how that individual student has grown over the past year and since they last took the exam. And so it's very helpful for us to identify students that haven't learned much over the past year.
Right, and there's a comparison to the grade, the local grade, and then there's a comparison to a national grade? Is that right? To a national mean?
For NWEA, we see how a student compares to the local school, and then also the global pool of students who take the test. It's the largest globally normed test that's out there, so it does give us very good data.
Right, I'm just kind of thinking ahead and how we would use that. I guess if given that the country's suffering together suffering, I'm using this term kind of loosely here, but, moving through this together educationally, you would think that the national average would kind of track with the local data as well. We wouldn't see these two moving discongruously, if you will.
I would agree.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how I want to make sure if we're going to use that, it's a reliable measure to use going forward, or just one of the tools to use going forward, and that we can rely on it.
Yeah, and Bethany, what's your opinion on that, and also how New Hampshire SAS in the spring would play into that discussion?
So I believe the NWA norms only are change every few years, so it's not quite as fluid, but we should still see some amount of that tracking. We use and our schools use an RTI process, so we're already looking at that NEWA data now and trying to make instructional and educational decisions for students based on that information. And that data will continue to be used throughout the year when we do NEWA again in the winter. And there's even the potential to do it again in the spring. So we're going to have that consistent data. And I really think that growth data is going to be the most critical for us there, and making sure that our students are continuing to grow, even more important than the norming data. So that should give us a good forecast of what kinds of interventions or supports we might need to continue to do over the summer. New Hampshire SAS is a little bit different, but we do have some longitudinal data with that, so we can see more cohorts of students. But New Hampshire SAS is also closely linked with NEWA. So based on how a student performs on NEWA, we have a pretty good prediction of how they will perform on New Hampshire SAS as well.
Adam, you're muted.
You're muted.
I just said some wonderful things too. So let me rewind. I want to share a little bit more about my thinking. We are a school district that has adopted a competency-based mindset where we believe kids ought to progress when they've understood or they've mastered and they've become adept at a certain standard or piece of material. Looking at Dr. Edinger, there's a comparison there. If a year of his residency was interrupted for some reason, we don't just say, well, good enough, you can learn about the left ventricle some other time. We make sure, and then there's eventually a board exam that he has to pass, right? That makes him qualified to move forward. I'm concerned about our students. I think that there are students that are academically going to have gaps that we're going to be able to demonstrate well. In addition to that, I think there are going to be some students who socially, emotionally, and even physically in some cases are not ready to progress at the same typical track that we establish in school, which is you move through the grade levels 1 year at a time, move to schools, between schools, and matriculate on a set schedule, and then leave us on a set time. I've had conversations with some seniors at our high school that are concerned they're not going to be ready for college next year because they've had now 2 interrupted school years, and all the seniors I've talked to are very complimentary of the school and the effort they're making and all of that. It's not an effort issue or a care or concern issue, but it makes me think, do we need to give parents and students options to not have to matriculate on the set schedule? That's my concern, because in addition to the academic concerns, there might be some 8th graders not ready for high school next year. There might be some 4th graders not ready for middle school, or some 6th graders at Mount Vernon not ready for 7th grade next year. And do we need to really break apart some paradigms to think about what do we do as an intervention for those kids that might need more time in the incubator before so that's really, in addition to the academic, I just wanted to say those other things. And so I'm going to ask subcommittees, think about that. Think about if we're going to do something that's really paradigm shifting, there's no other time to do that. There's no better or more opportune time for us to think about maybe some kids need more time before we pass them along. So that's really what's driving my thought process about that. And I just want to hear feedback from those subcommittees about that particular question. I'm going to move us along again, only because I'm going to try to get us done by 5 o'clock. There's a joint facilities meeting later tonight, and many of us have to go to that as well. most of you may not be willing, and that's fine, but I'm just curious. I'm supposed to plan for another school year by budgeting right now for another school year next year. And usually that's difficult because we don't know what's going to happen a year from now. Now it's exceptionally difficult because of COVID-19. So I'm trying to get a sense from those in this group who have knowledge or insight or just opinions. Do I plan for a typical normal school year next year, or do I really need to be thinking about things in a very different way and be preparing for more of the same? I know that's a difficult question, but anyone who can provide insight on that today or after meeting with subcommittees, I'd really appreciate hearing that. So anybody?
Adam,
Yes, sir.
you've already raised an issue that is outside the norm with respect to whether the gaps that may exist, whether that be academic, socially, emotionally, or physically for students. And I think, as Amy said earlier, when you're starting this budget process, you need to factor that some element of support to address the potential needs there. And hopefully you can get some idea from your leadership group with respect to what you have for data now, what that might look like on the academic side. On the other side, whether it's social, emotionally, or physically. I don't know if you want to consider taking some approach with your parents and looking at another way to do some research and do a survey with them in terms of if we were to have to go in this particular direction, and raise some ifs and what they might be thinking. My 32 years as a school superintendent, my parents always had the last say. If they wanted to hold their child back, we held that child back. Even we did our best effort to convince them that may not be in their best interest for all of the reasons that we've been talking about. But if in the end they felt that that was what they needed for their child, then I said, your decision, your child. So I think there's going to be an element of that, regardless of whatever plan that comes up, because I can't imagine that there wouldn't be some parents who feel very strongly one way or another. I want my child to move on, which means you're going to have some evidence as to why they shouldn't, or I want my student to be retained. And so again, I think it's good that we are thinking about this now.
Thank you.
Adam, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's been the budget impact since March 13th in terms of unexpected costs that you've already had to maybe look other places to gather money?
Yeah, our school boards approved over $2 million worth of COVID-related anticipated expenditures for just this school year to open our schools and to run them properly. I think, as always, we budget conservatively. Those numbers are on the high side, and we hope to save a lot of that. Frankly, if we went to red for a while, we would save some funds, right? So there's that thing to be in consideration. But there's no doubt there's been added expense associated with operating a school this way.
So is there any harm in anticipating that we will have to operate it again? And then if we have the good fortune to just have a regular school year, could that money then get, I don't know how the budget works in terms of, does that money go back to voters, or does that money stay in a pool and then the tax impact is lower the following year? But because it's so hard to say, I'm wondering if we know that it is more expensive to run the schools during COVID, it makes sense to me that we would anticipate those higher costs. But that's an opinion, and not based on anything other than an opinion.
That's what I'm asking for, Jolene. So thank you. Any others?
Adam?
Yeah, Mike.
Peter wanted to talk first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mike. I guess what I'd say is in business, at least now, we're looking at sort of a model of different budgets. What's the budget if things are normal, and what's the budget if things are not normal? I'm also doing that with a nonprofit right now, where here's the budget if it was normal, here's it not normal. But then look at what could change. And I hate to say this, I'm going to be the last person in the world to say something like the Mount Vernon Village School roof. Only because I fought like a dog to get that thing fixed 15 years ago, and I've been fighting ever since for maintenance. But that's going to be in the regular budget. If we end up with a budget that's completely upside down, do you need a roof? Or do you need to keep the community and the community healthy and the kids educated? So that's how I would look at it, is come up with two separate budgets almost, and then how could one adjust to fit the other, and basically what's going to be the worst case.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. I'm rethinking. Right as of right now, my proposed budgets don't include anything additional for potential COVID expenses, but our plan was to wait until as late as January, when we have to go to public hearing, before trying to make an educated guess. But I'm starting to rethink that based on the feedback already. Mike Berry.
Yeah, Adam, I think you're almost obligated to offer up a different educational experience as this goes into 2021, because there is going to be gaps. I think as educators and parents, we know that there's going to be gaps in all levels of learners, and we need to make sure that as a public school in New Hampshire, as one of the better school districts, that we are providing opportunities for those kids to close those gaps, and encouraging parents to look at where their learners, what they expect their learners to be at when they're moving on and moving through the system, and be honest about where they're at. And if we don't make those plans and provide that information, and strongly encourage that families take a hard look at where we are in the learning process for the students, I think in a few years, you're going to see people kind of regretting not looking at that. And I don't want to kind of just, Dr. LaBranch, I hear you about like the parents, I think, having the ultimate say, and they do, but I think we have to look at this situation that we find ourselves in now and go above and beyond to paint the picture of the reality of the picture, and not sugarcoat it, because it's not anyone's fault. Because in typical years, when kids are not moving and progressing through, sometimes the school systems and teachers and schools can be kind of like, the blame can be put on that. But we're in a situation where no one's to blame, but we have to deal with this situation and find solutions for it. And I know that from an education standpoint, and I feel that strongly as a parent, that I hope, my child's school would do the same thing, just to be honest with me about where we're at. So
I appreciate that. Anybody else?
Adam, I just have one more comment.
Yeah.
So I thought you were kind of gearing towards if we're anticipating COVID in the summer and into 21, 22, and people probably don't want to hear this, but I think it's going to be here. I think the Warp Speed project's been awesome, but it partitions out certain populations that they are testing, and it's also testing different types of vaccines. So as that data comes through, you're going to see some vaccines that are, hopefully all the vaccines are successful, but we're already getting hints that some might have some issues with them. Not all the vaccines are testing kids or elderly or immunosuppressed or pregnant women, for example. So you're not seeing certain populations. And depending on how that data comes out, and then subsequently how people get immunized into the spring, if the immunization starts late winter, early spring, we could be in a place where, one of the thoughts too is, because kids are on the lower risk side of the spectrum in terms of how they respond to the illness, that they might be late to the party in terms of receiving the vaccine. So I suspect we'll still be dealing with this into the late spring, summer, fall. That's, I think that's going to be tough for people, because we're seeing the fatigue right now, but I would personally budget for COVID going forward into 21, 22, the PPE. However, you saw your expenses go up and you're anticipating, I would anticipate it as such going forward.
I appreciate that. That's and I will forecast that one of the most difficult decisions school districts are going to have to make, and hopefully it's decided at the state level, but is if there's a requirement for vaccination to attend the in-person school, right? And I don't even want to touch that one yet, but I'm saying I can see that becoming a highly contentious issue, regardless of which side of that a school district falls on. Okay. Anyone else?
Adam?
Yes, Dr. LaBranche.
Yeah, Les, I confused Mike with respect to my comments when I talked about parents having the last decision. 99% of the time, we made the right decision. It was the 1% where we said, okay. Now, my other point being that regardless of which side of the argument you're on, without data, without evidence to help those parents along this process, we're going to be in a very difficult situation in terms of our credibility. So that's why I also was asking about the testing program.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so I'd like to wrap us up. Subcommittee chairs, are you guys all set and calling meetings and having that over the next 2 weeks? Anything I can do to support that, let me know. We do need a parent volunteer. Shannon Gascoigne is not able to serve that role this time around, which she's doing a lot with our joint facilities committee right now, so that makes sense. But I'm going to look for a parent volunteer, and if not, host that myself. But the rest of you, I'm going to assume you're all set, and you'll reach out to me if you have any questions or issues. But again, this has been tremendously helpful to me because no one wants to make decisions without consulting with people who have different perspectives, and you guys are extremely helpful for that. So thank you.
Adam, could you send the committee chairs just a quick email with what you want, what's the objective of each of the individual committees and some potential questions you want us to have answered?
I will.
That'd be helpful.
I'll do that right now. Thank you.
Yep.
With that, thank you all. Have a great day, and thanks for being here. Take care.